Hello and welcome. Today I would like to talk about what is good. So, I think first of all I would like to say that when we talk about ethics, morality, and the good, people tend to quickly have emotional reactions to that. And whenever we say a sentence about good, such as X is good, or X is bad, or X is evil, it triggers an emotional response in us because we tend to also, amongst other things, identify the philosophical position with an actual supporting position of that thing, so that we think that the person who talks about something also supports that thing. And therefore, one step further in our logical thinking, we think that the person who supports something will also make it want to be true and will enforce it, right? So with that out of the way, I think it's very important that we can broaden the conversation without having to think too much about people's emotional response and talk truthfully about the topic. So the reason why I want to make this recording is that I have thought about what is good, and I've contemplated what is good. It is difficult to know what is good. And the more I contemplate and the more I meditate, the more I realize that I cannot know what is good. And it is difficult to know what is good. And I'm not sure if I know what is good or if I can know it. So I would like to request from you to tell me what your findings are, what you found, realize, and think that good is. It's very important because I think the question of good is one of the fundamental questions of philosophy and therefore of humanity and existence. So, by understanding what is good, we can formulate philosophical constructs that ultimately affect our society and personal lives, as well as the construction of society, so a nation. It also flows into the ethics of science, of education, of law, and religion, and many other things. Thus, I would like to understand better what is good. And I have studied that topic on good, but I am not satisfied with the findings that we make. And thus, as I said before, I turn myself towards you to help me figure out what is good. Now, this essay is it's very much improvised. I do not have a script, as usual. I would like to make points that are not structured thematically, so it may be a jumping back and forth between points. And I hope it's still comprehensive, and still possible to find coherence in everything. So first, I would like to think about what is the difference between the good that we normally think about and the good that I'm talking about. When we normally talk about good, we tend to first think about our own good, so the personal good. For example, we can say that for me it is good when I can eat when I'm hungry. because it's helping me, because it improves well-being, and because it makes me happy and I like it, and that is considered good. However, personal good is not the same good as philosophical good. So the good where we try to understand what is good itself and what is the ultimate good, what is the nature of good or goodness, has very different qualities. We need to think about it differently, in different ways. So we have to distance ourselves from our own personal experience and look at it in a logical and ontological way. One of the things is that we can have different ideas about the good depending on where our point of perspective lies. So, if I look at what is good for me, I will find very different things from when I look at good from the point of view of a society. Because what is good for me may be bad for others. And, or rather, let's put it this formulation. Alright, so I would say that what is good for me may be bad for you. So that is between two different individuals. But then we have the general case, where generally speaking, for an individual, the good for an individual is not the same as the good for society. So personal freedom and expression can be bad for society. That is an example of something that can be good for an individual, but can be bad for society. Now, obviously, it also goes the other way around, that personal expression and freedom can be very good for society. When we think about the good in an even broader sense, on the larger scale, we think about what is good for humans and animals. So we think about also ecological questions, such as should we consume meat? Right? So that is a question that has come up again in the past century. And we can ask ourselves this question because we don't just look at it from what is good for humans, but what is good for animals as well. If we only think about us humans, we would maybe have a different view on whether meat consumption is good or not. But thinking about animals as well, the question changes, it transforms, it becomes different. So now we have to consider an entire different level of existence that partakes in the quest of figuring out what is good. If we then think even further, we also think about what is good for the environment in the sense of, for example, climate change, plants, geography. We may also think about what is good for the planet in general, and as a whole and in its entirety. In that, we start to put the point of perspective into something even larger, and we encompass more things by looking at the entirety of the planet, for example, with all its creatures, life forms and existences. Then we can go a step further, and now we go into a more philosophical domain, namely by asking ourselves, what is good for the universe as a whole? And there, our human logic doesn't seem to really hold much anymore. Because it is difficult to ask ourselves, what is good for a planet? What is good for a star? What is good for atoms? Right? So that is not something that we can really have a good connection to. We cannot say that chemical fusion is good for chemicals and for atoms. Even though, from the point of view of the reduction from complexity into simplicity, we might think that there is an equivalent from our human experience to the reality of atoms and molecules. So, and it also extends into much bigger questions, such as what is good for the universe itself, meaning what kind of goal does the universe have? What is the teleology of the universe? What is the state that the universe wants to go towards? Such as animals wanting to reproduce and pass on DNA and memes. We can ask ourselves, what is the goal of planets, of stars? And also, what is the goal of the universe in its entirety? Does the universe favor creation of diversity, or does the universe favor destruction of things? Or is it something in between, or can we not comprehend it because it's way too abstract and way too unrelated to humans, right? So figuring out the good for the universe is something that we can then say gets closer to the ultimate good, but is more and more difficult to figure out for us humans. Also, I would like to say that let us suppose that we broaden our view from not thinking only about humans, but also animals, and we try to think for animals. Now, that has various problems, but one of them that I would like to talk about is we interpret animal reality, existence, and life, experiences, and values from a human point of view. And if we then impose our values onto animals and say that this is good for humans, therefore it must be good for animals as well, we don't understand the difference between human values and animal values, and we impose our human thinking onto animals. For example, as humans, we are creatures that form certain kinships, tribes, and smaller units of society, where people exist in a hierarchy but share a relatively democratic existence, life and reality. However, if we think of the logic and ethics of a bee, whose social environment is structured entirely differently, with a hierarchy, but with a very different hierarchy and with different purpose in life, we cannot impose our human values that we derive from our human reality and our human instincts and genetics onto the bee's logic. So that is something that is very difficult. And when we then go a step further and we say that we try to impose our ideas of ethics onto the universe as a whole, it gets absurd and simply stupid. Because we do not have any relationship, point of reference, or ability to empathize with something as complex or abstract as galaxies, or a sort of transcendental or differently metaphysical existence of the universe. So at that point it becomes highly problematic, difficult, and speculative as to what the good would be, and how we can even see the good. Then I also had reason to think about the question whether happiness is good. Now, I will make things a little bit shorter because otherwise time is rather limited, or rather the recording would be rather extensive. So I will make unsatisfactory claims and simplified claims that I think the listener should expand, criticize, and analyze. If we look at happiness, one thing that we can argue and say and claim is that happiness is a very primitive and heavily narrow metric for good and depends on one's intelligence. If I have to wait for harvest, so I plant something in the ground, in the earth, in the soil, and I have to wait for it to grow, I will be unhappy while I have to wait. I will be unhappy while I have to do that work, but I will gain a lot once harvest is ready and done, and once we can harvest the fruits. So if we do not have the foresight and the intelligence of foresight, or the understanding of complex interactions, logical consequences and reasons, or reasoning maybe, we will consider harvest and farming as something bad, because it doesn't make us happy. It makes us miserable. We have to work and we have to wait. So why would we do that? So, relative to our intelligence comes the understanding of whether something is good or not. Not because we are happy about it. We can be happy about things that are really bad for us. We can be happy about substance abuse, for example. We can be happy about lies. And happiness itself is not a good metric, I think, to think about whether something is good for us. Pleasure as well. Pleasure falls into a similar case situation and logical debate as happiness. Humans are not intelligent enough to judge complex things about the world with their emotions. Emotions are not primarily made for that. Our reasoning, thinking, and critical logic is much more suitable for this. So happiness is not a good metric for figuring out what is good. Is life good? So is it good that things exist and that they reproduce and grow? Is that the idea of good? And we can also ask whether that is the teleology, the goal of and the consequence of the universe, whether the universe strives and tries to create growth in things. Therefore, whether life, organic life for example, or mainly, is considered to be a good, and whether that is something that we should strive towards. We can say that the universe does not solely support life. It supports a lot of destruction. When stars explode, a lot of growth is destroyed. Viruses take higher developed organisms as a sacrifice for themselves. Is that a flaw in the universe, in life and in existence, or is it even something that the universe strives towards just as much as life? That is a question that I leave up to the audience. When we talk about the good, we also talk about what do we want to support. because the good is something that we try to realize, manifest, and support. It is what we aim towards and what we want to achieve. And the question is also, what is it that we want to support? Which idea, concept, or reality is that which we want to aim towards? Then there's also a question of whether the good always has to be manifested, whether we always have to act in the greater good, in a philosophical good, or whether we also act in something that is lesser good, that is less good rather. For example, obviously it is a very touchy subject, but it is an example that I think people can relate to. When people talk about the ethics of abortion, some people say that life is sacred, therefore any abortion or killing of life is evil. Now, other people support abortion and they say that it produces many benefits, also for the quality of families and of the child to be born, that the child grows up in the right family and in a healthy and good environment. So, some people would then say that they solely go for the good that they perceive, such as for or against abortion. However, there can also be another view. There can be the view that we agree or disagree with something, but for practical reasons, we still choose that which we disagree with. So does the good always have to be realized? Or is it also the things that are not good that we sometimes have to realize and do? That brings me to another point. Namely, if we have to do something bad in order for something good to be the result, would that still go for the good or against the good? And how can we measure this? So that is a rather typical problem of ethics, but it is one that is somewhat tied, connected, and related to what I've just said about not always manifesting the good, but also sometimes manifesting something that is less ideal. Then we also have the question of whether good is equal to justice. So first, I think we should say something about the definition of justice. What is justice? And we're not going to go into this for the moment, but it is something to think about. Is good justice, and is justice good? Now, one possible way of thinking about the good is that it can be or is or maybe that which we agree with. So it is that where our soul is in agreement with something, our heart, our mind. So for instance, we can say that life is something we agree with, and therefore life is good. We can say that things pertaining to beauty are something we agree with, therefore it is good. And we can say that A healthy family is something we agree with, that our hearts are in agreement with. Therefore, that is good. Another thing is that, or another way of looking at good can be that good is that which keeps us from being dangerous. So good is something that minimizes our ability to be dangerous for other things, that keeps us under control, from within and without. Now, one thing that I also want to say is that good may have to do with purpose. Good can be that which gives us the purpose to be and do that. To become good. So whatever it is that which gives us a meaning to orientate ourselves towards it. Now, I think I would like to talk about something that comes closer to the things that I realize about the good. Some things sound similar to Christian ethics, to what some mystics say in various cultures, and maybe to things that other contemporary scholars and philosophers and thinkers say. But I would say this. One of the closest understandings of good may be that God is good, is the definition of good, and is the good, is the ultimate good. What do I mean with God? I've already talked about this before, previously, in another recording. But God can be seen as the ultimate reality. It can be seen as that which is when we put everything else together in existence. That which is the cause for everything and the result of everything. So the Alpha and Omega. Now, God as the ultimate good would also say that we live in this reality, in the existence in this universe. And therefore that which is the origin and the basis and the entirety of reality is the ultimate good. Because it is that which we are a part of. And we agree with things and are in agreement with things for our own good. And ourselves is good by default. Since what sustains us are many things of the outside world, but what primarily sustains us is ourselves. To become more of what we are is already in what we are. And since we are only a fragment of that which is God, we can say that we are an expression of good. And our agreement with ourselves leads to the agreement with God and with the universe. Thus, the universe itself is an expression of the good. And the highest good being God. Now, with highest good, I don't mean that everything that people attribute to God is good, because different people will attribute things to God in ways where it is not agreeable to other people. So we may say, for example, that we don't agree with God supporting holy wars. And people who do not agree with that do not agree with the idea of God that some people have. But God as a philosophical quality and concept and idea can be said to be good itself. The abstract idea, concept, and principle of good. And thus, everything that is in accordance with God can be seen as agreeing with the good and finding the good and understanding the good. So being in accordance with the world can be seen as good itself. Now, what does accordance with the world mean? It doesn't mean that we have to do things that some metaphysical entity tells us to do. It also doesn't mean that we have to return to a basic lifestyle such as that which our ancestors used to live in. It means that which supports the main idea of the universe is that which is good. So that which follows sort of the blueprint of the universe. However, and that is what I already said previously, that it is very difficult, if not impossible, for us to understand this. Therefore, it is difficult, if not impossible, for us to be truly good. We can say that the balance of things is good, since promoting destruction too much will create problems as we have them today in the deforestation of the Amazon forest, in the extinctions of other species. The sort of too tiny destruction, or the tiny destruction, is necessary. We have to eat other animals, we have to eat plants, right? So that is an example of where it is necessary. Our bodies have to defeat, combat, and battle viruses and bacteria when those get into our system. That is destruction of other forms of existence, which is necessary for the sustaining of humans. Now, the growth of life, the small growth of life, can be considered to be healthy. Reproduction, eating, medicine. But the excessive, the too great, and the extreme growth of life can be considered just as destructive. We can think of a virus that is way too good at destroying an organism and is way too infectious. That virus will destroy other species. We can think of tumors which grow way out of hand and essentially then also terminate the organism that they are part of. We can think of overpopulation. So balance, we can say, has to do, or may have to do, or can have to do with the ultimate good. And it's difficult to say what exactly balance is and how we can understand it. Another thing that we can say is good, or has to do with understanding the good itself, is when we try to be the best that we're made to be. So, someone who is born to be a painter has to be the best painter that they can be. Someone who is born to be a monk has to be the best monk that they can be. And there is not per se one thing that outstands the other identities, but so long as it is that which we are born to be, if we are trying to be the best of what we are born to be, we can consider that to be in concordance with the good. So for us, it would mean that we have to be the best humans that we can be. We should not try to be like the lions that exterminate other life forms by hunting them, by killing and by consuming them, because we are not made for that. And we should also not try to be like the herbivores who only eat plants and do not contribute to the ecological balance of other species by not eating them. Because that's not what we're made to be. We're humans. So for us, for this species, for our kin, it would be to be the best humans that we can be. And we have to understand what is human, and therefore what is a good human and what is a human that is not in line with the idea of being human. Now, there is a little problem in that. Namely, for example, we can say that someone who is born with psychological disorder to hurt other people, should they be the best at doing this? I would say this brings about a lot of problems. So we have to understand what we mean with being the best that we can be and that we're born to be. There's also another ethical question, namely, is the good itself, the real good, the true good, is it something that favors sacrifice or not? Is there a good with sacrifice and a good without sacrifice? We can look at this and say or conclude or see that sacrifice itself seems to be something that we cannot live without. We sacrifice other animals to live. We sacrifice plants to live. So we sacrifice freedom to have a society. We sacrifice our own time and other things about our lives and our, let's say, our abilities by having a family. So sacrifice itself may not be a criterion for whether good is or not. But let us think about this, and that goes more into the question of utilitarianism. Is the sacrifice of something small against the benefit of many good, larger things, is that understanding good? Or is it the other way around, that we have to sacrifice many for the few? An example of sacrificing few for the many could be that the trolley problem. So you have a trolley that will run into 5 people on the lanes. There is a separate lane operated by a switch with 1 person on it. And we can, or the person in question can choose to change the direction of the trolley so that it only requires the casualty of 1 person instead of 5. So that would be the sacrifice of few for the many. A sacrifice of the many for the few is, for example, a hostage crisis, where maybe 1 person is held hostage and we send in a troop to rescue that person. But in that, we endanger and maybe also sacrifice some of those people for 1 person. So the question is, whether good is by itself looking at only one of those 2 situations, scenarios, and alternatives, or whether both of them are considered to be good or bad. So which one of them is in alignment with what we can think of as the good. We can also say that good can be that which minimizes harm done to our bodies, to the psyche, and to the collective, and to our creations. So that would include any physical harm, such as in warfare. It would also include anything that causes a sort of a lack of the physical good, or the physical health, or the physical well-being, such as malnutrition. It includes harm to the mind, such as with psychological attacks or other disturbing causes, rather, of disturbances of the mind, as well as damage to society and the collective, such as threats to national security and to our creations, such as the burning of books. We can also say that there is the greater good and the lesser good. So the greatest good, we could say, is God, the universe, existence itself. And the lesser good is that which is good for humans, or that which is good in light of understanding humans, and that which is good through human logic. So we can say that in everyday ethical conversation, discussion, and debates, we talk about mostly human good, not ultimate good. Maybe the ultimate good would actually not be very practical for us humans. Maybe we would come to conclusions that would be very difficult for us to even build society around. Good is also that which we orientate ourselves by and strive towards. And then I would like to say a few things about the etymology of the word good, because I think that helps us greatly to appreciate the semantics, and we can get better understanding of what good is by examining the word itself and how it's been used throughout history. some of the things that I found in comparison of English, so Germanic languages, ancient Greek, Latin, Arabic, Aramaic, Hebrew, Chinese, Japanese, Albanian, Sanskrit, and maybe one or two others, is the following. In one etymological definition, meaning and semantics, good has something to do with belonging together. In another, it has to do with the holy, and it's been used as a quasi-synonym for the holy. In Chinese characters, good is written with the sub-characters of woman and child. So there are some interpretations. One is that it is good when a woman can give birth. That's a fundamental, very beautiful thing when birth is realized and when people are able to have children. So that could be one of the reasons, origins and meanings. Another is the love between mother and child. Yet another is that the character for woman is actually supposed to mean the character for daughter, and the character for child is supposed to mean the character for son. So having both a daughter and a son is great prosperity, luck, and a blessing. Or it is the character for woman and for a man. Therefore, the love between woman and man. Or it is about the beauty of a woman. So I thought those are pretty fascinating. Then we have some other words that are related to and have to do with the word good from different languages. Peace, true, real, guide, beautiful, and clear. I've talked before about that the highest good is God. The lesser good would be emulating God. So we can say that, or we could argue, and we may pose that we can never be truly good, because that is only something that God can be. But what we can do is we can try to emulate God. So how does it look like? It would be the saint, the sage, or the holy person whom we regard to have all of the attributes of a virtuous person, who strive towards those virtues and who live their lives in harmony with these virtues. There's also the question of, well, if the greatest good is God, and therefore also the expression of the universe, would it mean that the good that we should aim towards is keeping the status quo about the world, about the species, and about the universe? I leave that up to you, but I would say that it again goes along with the idea of balance. We can argue two ways. We can argue one way that our creations, so society, technology, science, philosophy, arts, and so on, are a good, are something that humans are made to be and should be. We can also argue that it is harmful. That through medicine, for example, we interfere with the natural way of things, with the order, with the balance, which we can see, right? There are arguments that an aging population is not healthy. There are arguments of overpopulation, and so on and so forth. And technology certainly has a lot of arguments for its sort of evil almost, where we terraform the planet in ways that destroy a lot of habitat for other species and consequentially also harm us, which is a little bit depressing to think that we only start to care about others once that actually also harms us or damages us or is bad for us. Another thing is to say that with everything we do, we destroy something else. So there is no thing that we do that is only good, but it always has the part of bad and evil in it. And so we have to understand where the good comes into place. Is it the intention? Is it the result? Is it the action? Or is it the fundamental quality that is to be considered good and that is the good? Also, what's very important, I find, is to see the relationship between the good and music and art. We can say that music is the exploration of the good. I wouldn't say all music, I wouldn't say all of art, because they have different means of what they try to do, they have different reasons and they have different goals. So the effect and the consequence of art is not always the same, but certainly or largely or mainly, it is in music and art where we find an understanding of the good. And I've said previously as well, in addition, that through music and art do we get closer to understanding what God is. I would also like to point out or say or add that that which is useful for survival is the smallest good. Because it only looks at things from the tiny proximity in time and space and in consequence of one species, and forgets to see the bigger connectivity of things, of consequences, of actions, and of effects. And how can we arrive at the good? I would say that it is through philosophical reasoning, through meditation, through music, art, and mythology that we can understand good. And finally, two other things. Good does not come from authority. I think that, or I would argue, or I point out that good itself does not have someone to speak in behalf of it. Good itself is an abstract quality, it's a concept, it's a principle. And there is no authority that can represent it. So we can say that, well, if God is good, or is the good, or the ultimate good, or is ultimately good at least. Maybe God is the authority for this, but I would say no. God does not represent it, God is it. And also good is in all of us. So we don't find good out there primarily, but we have to find it in ourselves. With that, I would like to thank you for listening. I hope that you can assist me, help me, and contribute to understanding good. It's a very important concept. It is a fundamental concept, together with God, beauty, truth. And I would say that any little bit of inquiry into the good is already a lot of work. And it is very difficult to figure out what good is. Having read things, having watched things, having listened to things, I still am not convinced about any definition or explanation of good. And I think it is something that probably extends at least mostly human reasoning. I think for it we need to look at mystics and hope that they can communicate it with us, which however is difficult because if we cannot arrive at the conclusion ourselves, what reason do we have to believe something? We would have to take their authority for an argument which is not a healthy argument. But I would like to refresh the thought that what I talk about with good is not about the thing that you and I can say, oh, murder is bad, is evil, charity is good, or good is that which helps people. I think that is not understanding the point that I try to present. Good as the ontological quality, good as the sort of basis for ethics, is something that requires a much different type or kind or style of explanation. And the closest I feel we arrive to having a satisfying answer is that God is good. And God is the good. Or rather not the good itself, but is sort of the most good. And again, my explanation for what God is something that I've already mentioned, talked about, and presented. And I would like to say that it's very dangerous when people claim that they understand God and derive authority from it. We have seen this throughout history. In theocracies. So I would like to say that God is a responsibility of all of us. It is a responsibility of us to discover and to cultivate, to deal with God by ourselves. Thank you.